I can now say officially good afternoon to everyone. We want to welcome you to our panel event today on student mental health. I'm John Finnegan, and I am Dean of the School of Public Health. Before we get underway, I want to first acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. And it's important for us to acknowledge the people on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relationships with the native tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words alone are not enough. We have to ensure that our institutions provide support, resources, and programs that increase to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. Welcome to all of you. As far back as 2013, researchers and writers have used the word crisis to describe the state of student mental health in U.S. colleges and universities. Now, I know that that word is often overused, but if you look it up, its primary meaning is this: an unstable and dangerous situation affecting an individual, group, community, or whole society. And that absolutely describes what experts are seeing. 1 in 4 students has reported a diagnosable mental health condition. 40% of students are not seeking help. 80% feel overwhelmed by anxiety, and 50% are so seriously affected that they struggle in school. And what's more, the manifestations of these conditions may lead to depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, addiction, and even suicide. Crisis indeed. What makes this a public health issue? Well, the sheer number of people that are affected by it. That means, of course, that there is no single solution to the challenge. Improving student mental health requires large-scale, organized, collective action. We have to focus not only on the downstream efforts of treatment and services to individuals, but we have to take a prevention approach and go as far upstream as we can. Way upstream, we ask 2 questions. What factors of university culture have helped form and sustain the crisis? And how do we change that to promote mental health and well-being? So in addition to the effective strategies downstream, these upstream questions push us to consider how we make the university into a place where human thriving is paramount. I ask, as many of my colleagues have asked before, if people can't thrive in the university, then what gets in the way, and how do we change that? This requires a deep and honest look in the mirror and a new resolve to make this the most supportive and none more than our newest leader. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 17th president of the University of Minnesota, Professor Joan Gable.
Thank you, Dean Finnegan, and I'd like to acknowledge Regent Dave McMillan right here. Are there any other regents here? And thank Stephanie Carlson for moderating the panel, and thank the panelists, of course, for their contributions and input. I want to use this moment, all of us together this week when we're celebrating the inauguration, the historical change in presidency, to amplify this important conversation. This is something we need to talk about. It's something we need to act on. And we know that the more we talk about it and the more we plan in our action, the less stigma is associated with the conversation and the more capacity we have to be allies or part of the solution for everyone for whom we would want to do so. It's how we maximize our students' opportunities. If they're not well, then most, if not all of the rest of what we do for them starts to dilute or disintegrate in its effectiveness. And we commit to students that when they come to us, that we will do our very best to make them successful in every way possible. And their well-being is cornerstone to that. It's the foundation upon which everything else happens. And as you heard from Dean Finnegan, we're really uniquely positioned to be thought leaders on this issue. We have the best and brightest faculty. We have amazing students. We live in a community where there are resources and interest. We have incredible amounts of campus programming, subject matter expertise, and mostly what I see as a new arrival into this community is a uniform passion to be a part of a solution and to be helpful in the broadest sense of that word. So just a little bit of insight into where we are and where things are going. We know we have gaps in the services that we provide and in our approach and in our subject matter know-how. So we're starting by trying to understand everything that we even have on this campus, which is an ironically complex thing to synthesize and assimilate. We're calling it an environmental scan because an inventory makes it sound so much flatter than it actually is of our activities, resources, research, programs, all related as broadly or in any way directly or indirectly to mental health. We're also leaning into our faculty's commitment to be part of a mitigation of the challenges that our students are facing rather than an aggravation, and they're taking the lead on that through the FCC to work on what that might mean. We're going to be leaning into our really robust health science platform, including new work on brain health, in addition to ongoing research that we have been continuously doing that should allow us to be scholars and advance the knowledge base and also clinicians in the newest and most effective ways. And we'll be relying very heavily on our community partners, and I see a lot of you here today who support the work both in subject matter content and in philanthropy, which is really critical to making things like this happen effectively. So friends, we really look forward to taking these important next steps together. I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to have this conversation, the first of many, and I look forward to hearing your remarks and for everything that we know is coming. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, President. All right, I think we're ready to go. My mic isn't on quite yet, but I want to introduce our panel. And then what I've asked, I'm Stephanie Curtis from MPR News, by the way. Thank you for being here. And what I asked our panelists to do was just briefly tell us a story or a reason why they're interested in this topic, what brought them here today to talk to us about it, and why they're passionate about the University of Minnesota discussing mental health as a public health crisis. And then something I wanted to start out with them each saying something they see that's a resource or something that's great about what's going on, so that because I want this panel to be about things we can do to make changes, and so that people feel like they've got some resources at the end of this. And the other thing I want to make sure that you know is that we've got a Slido discussion. If you don't know what Slido is, it's a way to interact. It's you just go to sli.do. There are panels up on the sides. And then look for the conversation Healthy MN. And you can leave questions there and look and see what other people have asked. And then I'll ask your questions of the panelists. So especially if anyone's listening out in Morris, also I know there's some people in Morris, because we have one of our panelists here is, I want to get it right, Sandra Olson-Loy. She's a Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Morris, thank you for being here. Nita Hernandez-Bython is Diversity Liaison Counselor at the University of Minnesota Student Counseling Services. Hi. Next to her is Lesley Kent, and Lesley is a fourth-year undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota College of Biological Sciences. And next to her is Kaz Nelson, who is an associate professor and vice chair of education in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Minnesota Medical School. All right, Sandy, I was going to ask you to start out. Why are you interested in mental health as an issue?
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm really happy to be here and happy to be a part of this conversation with President Gable and with all of you. We became concerned about student mental health a number of years ago when we started seeing more students being impacted by mental health, certainly while they were on campus, but also even prior to the time that they were joining us as students. So I would say 7 to 8 years ago, our data from the College Student Health Survey that we all have access to, thanks to Boynton's good research for us and thinking about student health as a public health issue, about 25% of students, so 1 in 4, were reporting lifetime diagnoses of mental health. Over the last 7 years, that's grown to nearly half of our students. So the data from the Twin Cities, I think that was shared, said 41% of students have a diagnosis of a mental health condition at some point in their lifetimes. On some of our campuses and in some of our subpopulations, it's even higher. So it might be over 50% of women on some of our campuses have had a mental health diagnosis. So that's moved from being something that we can respond to one student at a time to really being, as Dean Finnegan eloquently described, a public health issue and something that we need to think about more broadly. And so we really started looking at what can we do and how can we respond to that.
Nina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nina Hernandez Python. I use she, her pronouns. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. For me, this question is really personal. So when I went to undergrad, I was at a predominantly white institution, and it was a really challenging time for my mental health between the stress of the classes that I was experiencing, as well as different campus climate pieces. It was really difficult to continue to focus on my studies, and it took a toll on my mental health. So during that time, I was very fortunate to have both staff and faculty mentors, as well as fellow students, that we were able to gather together and have space to be able to process what was happening and engage in student advocacy at that time. And it was a really transformative time for me. And so after I went back to school and got my master's degree in social work, I knew that I wanted to work with the college population, and that I wanted to really work at this intersection between mental health and also diversity and equity work. So that's really what brought me here to this work. I've been here for 2 years now, and I've been really excited to see, I think, the question of what's working. I think one of the pieces is that there are a lot of really creative solutions, and that folks are not afraid to try new things and to get outside of the counseling center. So there's a lot of new programs that are coming between the Let's Talk program, the Mental Health Collective for Indigenous people, people of color, where we're recognizing that mental health support doesn't look the same for everyone, and that we're really putting energy and resources towards a more broad range of support for students.
Thank you, Nina. Lesley.
Hi, thank you, Stephanie. My name is Lesley, and I'm a fourth-year undergraduate student here at the U. My story is also pretty personal. The beginning of my mental health story starts when I was in high school. I received my first mental illness diagnosis at that point in time, and I was very keenly aware of the stigma. It was very difficult to talk about to friends, to teachers, to coaches, to really everybody in my life, and I didn't have a support system at all. And going through treatment, I learned a whole lot about what that system looks like. And I also began to learn about family members and other people in my life who had diagnoses who were afraid to talk about it because of the stigma. So when I came to the U, I was very excited to have the space and the agency to create new boundaries and habits for myself, and I thought that that would really take care of a lot of the mental health problems that I'd been having, and that worked for a few semesters, and it really wasn't sustainable. And so I knew that I had to go in and start seeking treatment, but there was never a right time, and things were really busy, and I was still doing okay, and so I pushed myself really to the point of crisis, and that's when I ended up going in. And the really interesting juxtaposition for me is that as soon as I came here in my very first semester, I got involved in student advocacy. And so throughout this whole journey, I was advocating for student mental health in all of these spaces, and yet I wasn't feeling strong enough to make that decision myself. So this is really near and dear to my heart, and I'm very flattered to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Kaz.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaz Nelson. I'm a psychiatrist here at the medical school, and actually I've been part of the University of Minnesota since I was at age 18. First out on the prairie at Morris for college, and then onto medical school residency here, and then joined faculty. And throughout that time, of course, with my degree in psychology and my dedication to the science of mental health and my psychiatry training, I've been a lifelong I've been interested for my whole life in mental health and advocating for mental health. But where things really got real, I thought I was advocating and going to my different spaces and saying, yes, this is important, but it was a little over a year ago where we lost 2 medical students. They took their lives, Dylan and Matt. And so what became kind of a flag that I was trying to carry across my different leadership and educational opportunities now was an absolute mandate. And if we're talking about anything else other than preventing the death of students, why are we talking about it? You know, as President Gable mentioned, if mental health is diluted, our entire mission of the University of Minnesota is diluted. And so to me, this is the foundation of the pyramid. It's the basis. And if we minimize that or ignore that or say, oh, it's just people of that generation or some of these things that people say, we're completely missing the mark. And it's time to get serious about this.
One thing I wanted to start out with, thank you all. One thing I wanted to start out with was by asking, you know, President Gable had said students, and we talked a lot about students, but the university is a big community. Nina, how do you see, who is affected by the mental health in the university community, and how do you see it as a problem with the overall population?
So I think I appreciate the survey that came out and giving us some numbers, and we are seeing that those percentages of students are continuing to increase. In the most recent data, it's showing that that women-identified students are at 48%. Reporting a diagnosis. It's slightly lower for male students, around 32% at this point. So we know that this is something that is increasing with each generation. There's been a lot of good research done with the Gen Z population, and so there's some guesses about why that might be happening. And so we know that likely mental health is something that is going to continue to increase, and that we need to continue to be thinking creatively about ways we can address it. One piece that I want to add too is that we know that it's relevant for our students. It's also relevant for our staff and faculty, and that it's important that we're including everyone in the conversation as we talk about mental health and how we can be addressing it. Yeah.
Sandy, what do you see on the University of Morris campus? When you talk about mental health, who are you talking about?
Right, I think similarly for us, it's really the whole student population. And so thinking about from the day students arrive on campus for orientation all the way through to their commencement, and really because of our close-knit community, also how faculty and staff and all of us are coming together to support our students and their health and well-being, and also supporting each other. So we have a new initiative called Morris Let's Thrive that really is looking at what do we need to do together to embed evidence-based mental health and well-being practices into everything that we're doing. And it doesn't need to be an add-on piece. We found when we were doing extra programs for students, like a great stress management program, students were too stressed to attend. Who has time to go to a nighttime program on stress management when you're really stressed? But 78% of students told us in that health survey that they had times in the previous year that they couldn't manage their stress. So we're looking at how do we embed these things into our classrooms, into students' co-curricular experience in an everyday way. And similarly, how do we as faculty and staff model good behavior as well and talk about what we're doing to have joy and recreation and peace in our lives, and not just how busy we are and the next thing that we need to be doing.
How do you integrate it into students' lives, Lesley? If it's not somebody coming to you asking for help, what do you see the university doing to integrate it into everything so they don't have to go to a nighttime stress management class, which sounds stressful to go to, indeed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all comes down to the culture around mental health, which I'm very grateful is pretty strong here. The stigma is definitely existing. It will be for a long time. But I am very thankful that I've been able to go through this time of my life in a space that is really quite supportive. There's a lot of resources available through Boynton and SES and a lot of different programs. And as President Gable was saying, there's such an environment here, and there's so many resources available. And honestly, one of the hardest things as a student is finding the right one and knowing where to go. But I really think the big step that's being pushed for now and that we're working towards is changing what that culture looks like in places like the classroom and how faculty and instructors interact with students. And I really think that that work is really, really impactful and really important because that will impact all students, not just those who are willing to go and seek treatment from a specific location.
Kaz, what are you doing to try to change the culture at the medical school, like in light of the deaths of those young men?
Well, I'm delighted to see the work of integrating, stress relief and other types of interventions throughout. But as a physician, I do really ascribe personally to the edict of first do no harm. So to me, it's not acceptable to harm students educationally and then say, but then let's do some stress relief. And so how many of you have ever been to a lecture where there were 80 slides, wall-to-wall text, and they only got through 60 of them and said, oh, the rest of the 60 memorize later on your own time. And we won't really tell you what's on the test. It's your job to look through those 80 slides and kind of tease out what are the learning objectives here. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but if that's the approach that we're going to take in the classroom, that's incredibly stressful. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to do the faculty development, the educational development to make the learning high yield, effective, and not harmful in terms of cognitive overload and stress. And that's something we're trying to do in the medical school itself. We have broad initiatives in that. And again, for a while it was kind of like, hey, let's think about changing the curriculum. And now it's like, nope, we got to do this. And so I'm really delighted to see some of those changes happening in that space.
Nina, what do you think about the particular challenges in a university environment that Kaz was talking about when it comes to mental health? Are there things that, if you looked at like just a neighborhood in St. Paul and looked at mental health challenges there, what would be different about a university community?
So I think the university community is really like a little community unto itself. And so there are a lot of pieces here about how what impacts one part of here is going to impact other places. What someone does over here is going to impact over here. And so one example of that is campus climate. I work with students, and I've had a lot of conversations where we talk about how the campus climate, various microaggressions or racist incidents that are happening on campus have a strong impact on mental health. And I think that we are at a really unique time in life. So this young adult phase where folks are really starting to understand and to question, like, who am I? What do I want to be about? What do I care about? And so in so many ways, it's a really good opportunity. You're learning, you're synthesizing information, you're challenging what you've come to believe to be true. And that can create some, create some distress. It can be difficult to think about how was I raised and how do I want to do things really similarly and really different. And it also really creates and ignites change and students demanding change of like, this is the way that it's been done, but I really know and I'm learning that I have a voice and I'm able to advocate for what I need to see. And I think that that's a really big strength that we have here at the university. And then I think also just the culture of care. And so the care that many of our staff and faculty and students have for one another, you see each other. You're not just going home at the end of the day. You see each other consistently. You're able to build relationships. And so we're all interconnected in that way, and it's important that we're able to pay attention to each piece of us.
Sandy, did the description of I'm getting nervous just thinking about slides going by and desperately trying to keep up with them. Is that something that you feel like you have at Morris, or what are the challenges that you find unique to Morris?
Right. I don't hear that from students as much. Maybe when they get to
That could be a
medical
med
school,
school
that's
thing.
more their experience. But I think faculty are really engaged with students and what those high-impact learning practices are. That doesn't mean that our curriculum isn't rigorous and isn't stressful just in itself, as students face learning new things and having to up their game from high school. And so we really are thinking about how to support students in that. And so our orientation group leaders talk about that some of this is hard and you have to learn how to study in different ways. And you really do want to use tutoring sessions and resources. And it doesn't mean you're not intended to be here and that you won't do well. It means that you need to develop some additional skills for support. And there's a great community around you to do that. What I hear from our faculty and staff more is a concern of how do we connect with students who really are in those places of struggle. And as we see anxiety now topping depression as the #1 depression that students are reporting, that manifests itself in different ways. We were kind of used to in higher ed how to support students who are struggling with depression, but anxiety in the last 5 to 10 years has really skyrocketed.
Why? Do we know?
I think the world is kind of high stress now, and students have faced, and my colleagues could speak to this more than I probably, the pressures to succeed and to do well and to be highly programmed and to be all interconnected with no downtime start when they're little. And to then come to college and know what the stakes are. It's expensive. They want to do well for themselves, for their families, for their communities. It's a lot riding on what's going on when you're in college, and all of those struggles that Nina was describing so eloquently about identity and who you are and those things that happen for you in college are overlaid, I think, on a different type of climate than what we might have faced a number of years ago.
Lesley, why do you think anxiety is the top problem identified by students in the university community?
I think it was kind of summed up already. It's a high stress time. There's a lot of high stakes. There's so much going on when you're a student here, and most of us come here and we want to be able to fully invest in our classes. We're paying a lot of money. We want to get the education that we came here for, and it becomes very, very difficult to balance that with being able to pay for it and having a job and being able to navigate any sort of mental health concern that you run into. And so what might be manageable in some settings, like an anxiety diagnosis, suddenly becomes completely not manageable because there are so many things that require your time and your energy, and you just can't meet all of the needs.
Kaz, what are you seeing about amongst the university faculty and staff and dealing with mental health? When you said the medical school needs to change, it's not just the students, it's everybody involved, and how do you make those changes?
Well, I think something that was brought up to some degree earlier, really, Nina, you brought this up, we should really highlight the idea that inclusion is incredibly important in this process. When we have diverse medical students and you look at the front of the classroom and you don't see that diversity represented up in the front of the room, you don't see someone who looks like you in the front of the room, or the preceptors that you go to rotate with are more homogenous, it can lead to this sense of being an imposter, and maybe I was let in by mistake. And then you look online at your peers' Facebook profiles and all of their accomplishments, and you can very quickly start to develop a sense of shame. Like, I'm not good enough, I'm not cutting it like my peers, and I don't see a pathway ahead of me to navigate that. That's where direct inclusion efforts, diversity and inclusion efforts, implicit bias training, all of those things that we're integrating more robustly at this point come in to try to mitigate that. Because what I'm hearing the students saying is, it's high stakes, and I don't think I can cut it, and I think I was let in by mistake. And they couldn't be more wrong about that.
Do you hear that, Nina? Is that something you've heard before when you're counseling? You've been over here for 2 years, and you were the first person to hold your role. Tell people about your job and how you decide to build it.
Sure. So the Diversity Liaison Counselor was a new role that was created 2 years ago by Student Counseling Services. And really the hope for the role, when I came in, I did my interview, and I was like, what's a typical day? And they're like, we don't know. You're going to figure it out with us. And I was like, all right, sign me up. I was excited for that. So really what the hope is that it's that I'm able to work with students who might be traditionally and rightfully hesitant to access formal counseling services, and to be able to be more creative about providing mental health support in the community. So the role is not about bringing in more students from diverse backgrounds to our counseling centers, but being able to provide alternative spaces and to build relationships really with campus partners to be able to provide mental health services where students already are. So that means that I go to a lot of groups, I do outreach presentations, I get to provide trainings for staff and faculty about how to support students in mental health in a better way. And I did want to add just to the anxiety piece, I appreciate that you brought up social media. I think it's a piece that's really important, and that we know that a lot of good can come from social media, especially when we think about destigmatization efforts. There's a lot that can come from seeing and from reading other people who have had similar experiences as you, but we also know that it can raise stress and anxiety. When you're seeing yourself and you're comparing yourself to a facade that other people are putting up, you're never going to compare because you know about the inside about how you are, and you're not seeing necessarily the insides of how other people are. Many of us, we wake up, we scroll on our phones, we go to bed, we scroll on our phones. We don't have those same periods of rest, relaxation, rejuvenation that was had not so long ago. And so I think really being able to cultivate and carve out spaces where we're able to connect and move out of that isolation is really important.
And you don't only talk to students, you invite faculty and staff. Do you see similar anxiety amongst faculty and staff or the older grad students too, or is this something that's particularly for the undergrads?
Yeah, I think I see it similarly across. I think there are definitely nuances, and so I think for grad students, really thinking about, I'm at this. For many grad students, I'm one of the first in my families to be in a graduate program, and think some grad students have gone straight through, and so trying to figure out what are my next step for me can be a really stressful time. I think the imposter syndrome piece that you spoke about was really relevant both for undergrad students as well as for grad students. I don't work with staff and faculty necessarily on their own personal anxiety as much as it is how they can support students. And it's been really powerful, I think, to see how staff and faculty are really invested in supporting our student mental health. And again, there's a lot of creative initiatives with the Mental Health Advocates Program, being able to provide some training for staff and faculty that are really interested in supporting their students.
What is the Mental Health Advocates Program?
Yeah, so the Mental Health Advocates Program provides so folks are able to opt in, and they can sign up if they're interested in being designated as a mental health advocate. So take an advisor, for example, who really cares passionately about mental health. We know that students might go and talk to their advisor more quickly than they might come and talk to me in student counseling services. So the program is able to provide some training, and then they're able to have a cool little sign outside their office to say, I care about mental health, I'm here, I'm someone you can talk to. And really the hope is that they're able to have some more complex conversations with students.
What do you think the barriers are for students to go walk into counseling?
There are many, I think, and I'm not going to speak so much to those related to marginalized identities because that's not my experience particularly, and I don't think that would be appropriate. But I think that the story I shared about trying to balance this idea that I'm a functioning member of this community, I'm taking a full course load, I'm on track to graduate in 4 years, I'm doing okay in my classes, I'm involved in other things, it becomes very difficult to convince yourself that you're worthy of those resources, and it's easy to build up in your mind that other people need it more. And so why would I go take up that space when I know that resources are limited and so many people need to access them? Why would I take up that space from somebody who might need it more? And I share that experience, and I've heard that experience from my peers as well. And that's also, I think, connected to the school year is busy, I have so much going on. Going and seeking treatment for mental health is not an easy thing, and I think that's the biggest frustration I've experienced in finding community in the classroom and sometimes working with faculty and instructors is they don't understand that it's not just a quick snap of the fingers and that this is an ongoing process. And navigating all of the barriers and all of the systems to be able to get the support I need in the classroom is a very difficult, time-consuming, energy-consuming process, and I completely understand how students get burnt out along the way.
How do you stop how do you stop the imposter syndrome and the feeling that you're not worthy before it starts, Kaz? Like, it'd be great if we didn't have to get to a point where someone needed to go into counseling and we had a culture or a mindset change. How do you do that?
Well, I think labeling it for what it is, talking about it in these types of forums, is step number one, because there's so many people that I've talked to where they start to talk about something like this, and I can almost finish their sentence, and they say, oh, how did you know? I thought I was the only one experiencing this. And it's just ubiquitous. And there are times where I've certainly felt like an imposter. Oh, I shouldn't be up in front on this panel. And I stop and I remind myself that's what probably everyone on this panel is thinking at this moment. And so if you could all just know how universal this is for people who have lacked representation for being on the microphone, then we can ignore it. Ignore those flags that come up and say, I'm not worthy.
How do you recreate the whole mindset of higher ed when it's about achievement, it's about having your mind be quick moving and adept, and you can think deep and you can think quick. And so people really don't want to acknowledge that they may be having a problem, and they go into it wanting that thrill, that to be pushed. How do you're trying to make Morris a warm, supportive environment? How do you keep academic achievement going so students and faculty and everyone feel fulfilled without burning out?
That is the ultimate question.
It is. What are you going to do, Sandy?
Well, a group of us are thinking about it and working on it, and I think it takes a village on all of these things. And our students are really engaged in challenging coursework. They're also involved with their faculty on research. They're looking at studying abroad. They're leading student organizations in huge numbers. They're involved in athletics. 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 of our students is a varsity athlete on our Cougar athletics teams. So they're juggling a lot of things, right? And I think with all of these roles that we have, the work is potentially never done. And so how do we set something up where people know that it's okay to pick how much you're going to do and that you don't have to do all of these things and take advantage of all of the stuff at every turn? There are great opportunities and you want people to plunge in, but to make good choices. We see first-year students who want to come in and take 18 college credits. That's not wise as a way to start out and to find your place in a community. And so trying to give good advice early on, and then I think to look at, again, how we're structuring our expectations for students in their courses, but also in the co-curriculum and in student life, and how that's modeled by our peer leaders. We're really fortunate to have a great group of upper class students who take on a variety of student peer leadership roles, and those of us who are adults who get paid to work at the university and say great things about the place have less of an impact sometimes on students' lives than their peers, like our good colleague who's here today. And so I really value the leadership of our student associations in both helping us look at what we need to do to better support students, but also to model for new students coming in how to be successful in college and how to take time for yourselves and to prioritize your mental and physical health as well as everything else that you're doing.
Nina, what do you think? What do you think about the students who really are driven and want to achieve that? Undergrads who want to go off to med school, grad school, who just want to get an A or a B plus, whatever it is that's a big achievement for them. Before it hits a crisis, what should people be doing just to make their lives feel fulfilling and yet not overwhelmed? I want to know too.
Take notes, right?
I'm going to take notes.
I would really echo a lot of what you shared. I think a phrase that a supervisor told me at one point is to fill your life with things that fill you up instead of numb you out. And I really appreciate that idea. How can you choose between all of these different activities that are offered to you, supports that are offered, and how can you really engage in the pieces where you're going to find joy and find life and find connection, versus the pieces that might be numbing, so like Netflix, Hulu, right? All of these pieces that we can think of as self-care, and not to say that we can never be on Hulu, but to say that it's really important that we're finding ways to continue to give back to ourselves. And I think really practicing the art of saying no. I think some of us are socialized to say yes to things. We come here and we're excited to get involved. We want to say yes to all the things, but really recognizing that that comes at a cost of other things. And so being able to try out new opportunities and then to choose, like, which are those pieces that are giving you life? Where do you feel like you can show up fully as yourself and connect with other people who care about the same things that you care about is really important.
Kaz, what about medical students? I mean, I think about people who've been going all their lives to get into medical school, or even if they're ones who kind of wandered through and got an English degree, then they quick do all the science they need to get in. And it's a competitive environment, and it should be. They should be being pushed and trying to achieve, and yet we don't want them to burn out. What do you do in that case if you really want to be one of the top people and not have a crisis hit you?
Well, it's true. Our medical students are the best of the best, but sometimes that perfectionism, that drive, comes at a substantial cost. And so we're trying to do much better at acknowledging that, talking about it, being open about it, making sure that nobody suffers alone. We have peer support programs. We're going to be building a house system, Hogwarts-like, house system where we can have smaller groups of community, because we've got 2 campuses, Duluth and the Twin Cities, and it's a large number of students. So stepping into a medical school, feeling hyper-competitive, it's not a setup for community and connection. And so we need to be extremely explicit about building those kinds of connections. And then other things like not having a grading system that slices people into little bits. You know, we have a pass-fail system essentially now in our first and second year. to enhance community and make it so that you don't have to step on the next guy to get to the top. Because in the end, all we want to do is provide exceptional care and drive knowledge for our community. And we shouldn't have to do that at the expense of one another.
Lesley, we've heard a lot about peers reaching out to each other. If you saw somebody who was doing too much, or you felt like, you're on a bad road here, what do you say to that person? And what are the signs that they might be having some problems down the road before it hits a crisis?
I think that peer support is the most important thing. And that's from my own personal experience and looking at the difference between how I feel supported now than when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I knew one person who had an anxiety disorder, and that was it. And this was a person who I used as a role model through this whole time, and that was my support system. And now in this space, I found a lot of other people who have experiences similar to mine that remind me that I still belong here, and that just because I'm having these difficulties doesn't mean that I should leave, or that I got in by accident, because those feelings are very real. And so I think the really cool thing that happens with peer support networks is that we're all at different places on this journey, and we can all share those with each other. And so people will say to me, hey, I remember when I felt like that too. I remember when I was at that point, but I went to therapy for a few more months and I came out on the other side of this. Or I had this conversation with my instructor and they were really understanding and it turned out okay in the end. And I think that the way that you do that as a student is the way that people have done it for you.
I wanted to talk about something that one of my colleagues last week said, let's think about everyone who's missing up here. And we've got 5 people up here who all happen to be women. I was wondering, Nina, what you think are particular challenges for men at the University of Minnesota. What do you hear from male students that is different than women?
Yeah, I think first I just want to acknowledge I appreciate the question of who's missing on stage. I think whenever we have formats like that, it's really important that we're able to see a really representative group of our students. And so specifically speaking about the men piece that's missing, I think a couple of things that I hear from students, pieces related to ways that men have been socialized to show feelings, whether that's okay, whether that's not okay, which specific feelings are okay to exhibit, and which ones are seen as weak. So the ideas of how toxic masculinity comes into each individual person, the way that some folks have been socialized. It's not to say that there aren't men that exist that have really been socialized to realize that feelings are information, feelings are okay, feelings can pass. Frequently there's a mixture of feelings that are happening. So I would say that that's one of the big pieces that is really important, is that as we look at the rates and that knowing that there's more women that have been diagnosed than men, being able to provide support to our male students and to normalize that conversation as well. Just one more piece I want to add.
Yeah.
I also think the conversations that women have amongst women and men have amongst men is different. So I think that women are socialized to be caring and supportive and to have supportive conversations, and that doesn't always happen between men. And so being able to have a space where you're able to be vulnerable and to share and to connect on a more intimate level, I think is something that's also really helpful, and really where a lot of men are leading the charge. There's a lot of good men doing good work around how can we have these types of conversations amongst ourselves.
Sandy, University of Minnesota Morris has a large Native student population, and I was wondering how that factors into how you talk about mental health on campus.
Right, thank you for that question. About 20% of our students are connected to a Native American tribal community, and so really significant part of our student population and also our campus experience. And I think we're learning more and talking to elders and leaders about understanding how to support Native students in culturally relevant ways. And so thinking about culturally protected practices that make a difference for Native students. We bring Native elders to campus for elders and residents where students have a chance to connect with and to learn from elders. We have a new program that's just starting this fall that was suggested by one of our alums who's actually in a public health PhD program on the Twin Cities campus now, who's native Madison Anderson, who suggested that meeting with elders is great, but you're kind of on your best behavior, right, when there's an elder on campus and needing to be respectful of them. And it would be great if we had an auntie in residence program, and that aunties play a really significant role in Native communities and would be someone that you could talk to more honestly and who could also help you with issues and do traditional things like making ribbon skirts and sharing teachings around them and things like that. So we actually just had a colleague from the Upper Sioux community, Marissa Anawash, who visited our campus this last week to talk about what that program could look like. And as a member of our American Indian Advisory Committee, is game to be our first ever auntie in residence. So that's one of the pieces.
I think MPR News needs an auntie in residence. That sounds fantastic. All right, I want to talk about what we can all do and some good practices besides. I watch too much Hulu. I do watch too much Hulu. But I also want to talk about how the expectations from the community to make student lives better, less stressful, and help their have good mental health, how that leaves a burden on staff and faculty too, because there are so many expectations from students. They're paying money to be here, they're working really hard, they want to get everything out of it, and then a lot of stress falls on faculty and staff to make sure that students are having the best 4 years or however many years of their life. Sandy, how do you think about that when it comes to your own, like your faculty and your staff?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we see at Morrison across the system. We have a system-wide mental health learning and collaboration network that's sharing good resources and practices across all 5 of our university campuses. And so thinking about how we support faculty and staff and supporting our students is one of those things that we're taking up this next year. And I know something that President Gable is really interested in looking at as well. Our faculty are really concerned about our students as our staff, and so we receive calls from people who are concerned about a student who's not doing well, who's one of their student employees, and our faculty who are seeing students who are dealing with anxiety in a way that lets them not come to class to take a final or to send emails that they're in places of struggle. And so we have information on crisis support and how to refer students to seek support for mental health issues, and so we're sharing all of that. The Morris Let's Thrive initiative that I mentioned, we've workshopped with faculty and staff and shared some of the research that we're seeing from across the country and how some of the leading institutions are taking steps around this. And so people have really responded that looking at how we can really embed and help people understand the evidence that's out there of what practices do support mental health and well-being into our everyday lives is really important. And so that's a step that we're proud that we're taking and that's been well received. So we provided for faculty and staff this year a list of 10 ways that you can embed well-being into your student lives, students' experiences, and then similarly for students, 10 things that you can do to elevate your mental health and well-being practices as well.
Give us some.
Sure. One talks about valuing sleep. We know from our surveys that students who sleep an adequate amount, 8 to 9 hours a night, which who in college thought they had time to do that, are more able to manage stress, right? It's really positively correlated. And on the flip side, if you don't, as most of our students don't, sleep enough, you can't manage your stress as well. And so we've shared the research that shows that a leading researcher, if students receive less than 6 hours of sleep, less than 6 hours of sleep for 4 more days in a row, it's the same as if they didn't sleep at all for 48 hours. In terms of impact on memory, on well-being, on all of those things. So helping students understand that by staying up late to do things, you're not actually helping your academic performance, you're hindering it, and sharing more of that research and information is one of those pieces that we're putting out there, for example.
Lesley, does that sound about right? What are student lives like for those of us who are no longer students?
Yeah, you bet. I think that's really important, and that's one of the big pieces of peer support that I have done. There's a big culture, particularly right away in the beginning of your college career, about teaching students what it's like to be a college student. And instructors have high demands, and they want you to come to class, they want you to complete your assignments on time, and so they structure it in such a way that they hope that you can interact with the course material in the amount that you should, because it's very different from high school, the class time to homework ratio. But what ends up happening is all it takes is one night where you stay up too late to finish your homework assignment. You only got 5 hours of sleep. The next day, you're drowsy. You're not really paying close attention in class. Then the following week, when you're studying for the exam, you realize you missed all of the notes from class and that you have to reteach it all to yourself. So then you stay up late and you only sleep a few hours before your exam and you don't perform as well as you want to. And it's just a spiral. And I think that it's a universal experience for students to do that because it's so easy to convince yourself this is just one night. I'm just going to stay up and finish this assignment tonight. But once you go down that path, it's so hard to come back from. And I think that's why crisis situations happen down that path later in the semester, is because there's no way to come back from it. Once you're behind, and it's so difficult to get back on top of everything.
Kaz, you're nodding a lot.
Yes, and the other thing I would add, sometimes I've just noticed a little bit of a divide sometimes between faculty and staff and students. And it's the kind of divide that you maybe would have seen in the past where maybe there was 30 years difference between people and they would say, well, I just don't kind of understand what's their problem. When I went through that training, it was so simple to do X, Y, Z. What's their problem? But now that, because of the pace of change of society, that's compressed now. And I'll see faculty members saying that about people coming through 5 years ago. Oh, well, why can't
What's
they
with
do
the
X,
kids
Y, Z?
these days?
Yes, what's with the kids these days? Somebody 5 years, following in your footsteps. And I think it's very easy to kind of fall in that trap and forget that the pace of change, the change in technology, the amount of information, the amount of cognitive overload. And so really, if we're going to be successful, I'm begging people to understand that we're not comparing apples and apples when we look at people following up in our footsteps. It's apples and oranges. And we can't just apply that same assumptions about, well, I could do that, why couldn't they? Well, maybe when I went through medical school, we took care of 8 patients a day. Now they're taking care of 30 because of the efficiencies that have been built into the system. But it's very overloading for somebody. And so we just have to avoid falling into that trap and understand this is a different context, and we have to see it differently and not compare ourselves.
How receptive is the faculty to changing the stress levels, to opening and saying, okay, they are under a lot of stress, or my teaching style is too much, or how open are they to making changes?
We definitely see early adopters who say, oh yeah, I can absolutely see how this would lead to a better outcome. And then we have late adopters. But what's been wonderful is actually...
That's a very nice way to put it.
Slow to adopt. But I think what is much more effective than coming in and just pounding on the table and say, we need to change this, is showing data on how do people learn, what's effective. When we give somebody an end of semester exam and that's what the whole grade is based on, you kind of get into a binge and purge cycle of information. People might do well on the test, but it's because they stayed up all night studying for it, and they're going to forget a lot of those details the next day because it's not effective teaching methodology, even though we kind of pat ourselves on the back and say, well, they passed the test, so they must be prepared now for their future. And so I think educational science and data have really helped us make the case that if we don't change, we're really just fooling ourselves.
What are some other stresses that come from other places where we've been talking a lot about competition and workload and achievement? What other factors are involved that add to poor mental health for students, Nina, that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah. Couple come to mind. I think, so students are students, and they also have many other facets of their life that are going on. So there might be home stresses that are happening for students. Financial stressors are a huge piece that we hear about frequently. Students who are trying to juggle multiple roles, so they might be a student parent, they might be working multiple jobs, they might be a caregiver. So some of those day-to-day life stressors really can have an impact on being able to show up and just focus on academics. Another piece that I think is really relevant is whatever might be happening both in the large political system, but also in the campus climate system here. As I said earlier, we are a microcosm of that. And so I was teaching, I was a grad TA during the election time, and many of my students came to me and said, it's really hard for me to be able to focus on studies when there are all of these other things that are happening in the world. And I think that that's important that we pay attention to, because it does have an impact on our students. Similarly, when there's incidents that happen on campus, those incidents really have an impact on students, and being able to show up and think about, how can I achieve greater academic stress is not going to happen when you're worried about your basic level survival, and we just know that to be true. So I think that those pieces have been and need to continue to be a part of the conversation as we look at systemically how the university is addressing those.
Lesley, we've talked a lot about how peers can be a big help and a great source, but I also want to point out that the top source of stress for students is each other. 22% of people say it's their roommate that's driving them crazy. How do you learn to live with other people if you are stressed out or they are stressed out and your roommate's driving you bonkers?
That's a big question. That's a loaded question. I think that a big piece for those of us who come to college right out of high school and are in that traditional age of 18 to 22, it is the first time where you're experiencing a lot of that agency and independence to make a lot of decisions and to have to learn to problem solve a lot of things for yourself. And there are resources on campus that talk about things like that say, day-to-day life things, the things that we all experience every day, struggling to manage conflict with the people that we work with is completely relevant. And I think that a lot of classes are building in sort of peer interaction or small group work and really encouraging students to think critically about how they interact with each other and to manage those conflicts productively.
Nina, what advice do you have for, all of us, to just get along better? Since you can easily make someone's day better, and it'd take me 5 minutes to make someone's day really bad. I could find some way to do it, I'm sure. How do we get through a day and just with a little bit more grace for one another?
How do we play nice with each other? This is your question. I think one of the pieces that I think about is that a lot of times folks haven't been taught how to engage in conversations with other people when there's conflict. I think a lot of times it can be easier and tempting to talk to someone on the side or to kind of skirt around something. And really being able to gain some skills and being able to say, this thing that you did, I'm not really a fan of. Can we talk about this? I think is a really helpful life skill and can really help so that, if the other person leaves one dish, you're not the dish, but it's actually about 80 other things that haven't been addressed. So I think some of that, assertiveness, figuring out how can I address these things as they're coming up is really important. I also just really appreciate recognizing that everyone has a story and everyone is going through things and being able to have some grace for folks and also to challenge, and that's a gift that you can give to people. But being able to be curious about where is this coming from for you, here's where it's coming from for me, and being able to engage in that way is important. I do think also, though, that we need to conserve our energy and we need to think about when are those conversations that I do want to have, when are those times when I don't want to use my energy in that way, and that we get to make those choices for ourselves. And we can pull in other people to help support us and help advocate for us, but it's not always on us to be the one who has to do that.
Sandy, you mentioned there were 10 things for faculty to do to make Morris thrive. What are some of the ideas you have? And I will vamp a little while you open up your iPad. There we go. Give us one.
For faculty or for students?
For faculty.
For faculty?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me get to that part of the list. I think some of it is also think about embedding well-being practices into your syllabus and into your course work. One of our alums teaches at a school in New England, and she was back, and we were talking about some of these issues. It's not just Minnesota that's having these conversations, but across the country. And she opened her courses, which is one of the things that we recommend too, with having breathing or meditation exercise of just helping students be centered and be present. So leaving other things behind that you're bringing with you and focusing on being there together and focusing and having that time. And there are apps like the Breathe app that has a little circle, a dot that expands and contracts that you can put your breathe along with it, in and out, and it just slows your heart rate down and brings your focus to what you're doing together. And so taking a little time to center before plunging into the coursework. And that's something quicker and easier to do than getting a good 8 hours of sleep in just a few minutes. Another one is recognizing the power of being outside and in nature. Research shows that 15 minutes a day outside and with nature and just being outside of your head is really helpful and makes a difference in people's well-being overall. Our colleagues at Carleton College brought some of the positive psychology work to us, and so we're doing positive psychology information and helping students look at embedding gratefulness into their days and their conversations. And I think that's also one of the pieces in terms of students connecting with each other. To share something you're grateful for takes just a few minutes at a club meeting or in the classroom, and helps people connect in a different kind of a way that builds connections and community.
Did you want to say something?
Oh, I
Yeah.
have yes. I have a very strong piece to share here, which is that we have this conversation a lot in student advocacy spaces about what we want from our faculty and instructors. And I think it's really important to acknowledge a lot of faculty will say, well, I don't want to be my student's therapist. And we don't want that. I don't want you to be my therapist. I just want you to be understanding. I don't need for you to fully educate yourself on mental health and mental illness and all of its impacts. I just need you to trust me and understand that I'm going through a tough time. I'm an adult. I'm seeking treatment. I'm doing these things. And I would ask for you to respect me in the same way that you would respect your colleagues having that conversation with you. And so I love it when my instructors are doing these more high-stakes things, but really, I just want to be treated with respect in all of these conversations, and I want for my professors and my instructors to say, yep, I see you, that must be hard, let me know what you need. I can be slightly flexible with you, and there are ways to uphold all of the rigor of the course while just being understanding that we're all people and things happen.
And related to that, too, I think it's important for people to know that dealing with mental illness and mental health issues are recognized as psychological disabilities within our disability resource centers. And so there also are supports for students who are carrying these heavy pieces to have some support in the classroom and to recognize flexibility around deadlines or around things, especially if you need to be out for more extended treatment and support. And encouraging faculty, one of the tips is to include in your syllabus resources for mental health that are available on campus, and also notes about how those kinds of accommodations are made available to students.
And Cass, how treatable, well, especially anxiety, since it's the top concern among students, how treatable is it?
Some people will struggle lifelong with anxiety symptoms. Other people with specific interventions can have them essentially resolve. And so everyone's a little bit different, but the idea that you're stuck with certain symptoms forever, that's just the way your brain or body is absolutely not true. It can be recalibrated. Your anxiety systems can be down-regulated. It's all wiring and learning, and your body can relearn to experience safety in environments where safety is warranted. But I think it's really important to point out that sometimes this anxiety or sense of lack of safety is warranted. The body is sending an anxiety signal because something about it doesn't feel affirming, or they don't feel seen, or they feel unsure. Is this a trap? Is this a threat? Am I going to succeed? And so really being careful to not diagnose something as a disorder where they're really getting signals with important information that they maybe need to act on or make sense of or advocate for themselves in that setting. And so I don't want to go too far down the path that if you're just feeling anxiety, it's pathological, because there are a lot of things this day and age to feel anxious about.
Nina, you've been in your position for 2 years. You were the first person to have it, as you said. What changes have you seen in the university community since you started?
I think one of the things that I have seen is it feels like a lot of folks are believing that this is important work that they need to be doing. It feels like there's people from various places around campus that are really engaged and wanting to join the conversation. So it feels like a really strong wraparound approach. So our partners, for example, in Recwell, are recognizing we can't only focus on physical health, we need to think about mental well-being. How can we work together to incorporate all of well-being in what we're doing here? And I think that that's been something that's really exciting to see, and that it's not only going to be left to the 2 campus counseling centers here in the Twin Cities campus, but that we really need partners from all across campus, including student groups, including staff, including faculty, including clinicians, to be able to make changes.
Lesley, what have you seen change over the 4 years that you've been here?
Great question. It's a little hard to say because I think that the culture changes as you go through the university. So the type of culture that exists when you're a first year is very, very different than the culture that I'm in now as a fourth year. And I think that a lot of that has to do with this piece of trusting that we are adults and we're going to make decisions that are in our best interest. And that's the biggest difference that I've noticed, not necessarily as a change in the university culture, but in a change in being a new student here to an old student here, and how in my first year getting flexibility on things was a no-go. They would say, this is it, you need to learn, this is college, there are deadlines. In the real world, you don't get to be late. And now that I'm in my last year, my instructors say, yeah, let's have a conversation about it. And that's a big difference. I also think that as more time goes on, you do a better job of finding peer communities that you fit into really well. And so in comparison to my first year to now, I have a group of friends who are much more supportive and understanding of that, just because I've had the time to find those people and connect deeply with them.
Kaz, what changes have you seen? Oh, Nina, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted that we were making me think of another piece that I think is that we're really seeing both at student counseling services, also at Boynton, is that we're seeing many more students come in for formal counseling services. So in both of our places, our numbers are really increasing. And I think stigma is also decreasing. I am hearing many more students out in the open talking about mental health issues in group settings, in presentations, and it's been really exciting to see how when we're able to have platforms like this, that it feels like the stigma is beginning to decrease, and that more students are really accessing their support. And I think I might also just add, I'm really excited to see what will continue to happen, President Gable, with your support and really having this be one of the forefront of what you're caring about. I think it deserves the time and it deserves to be interwoven into everything. So I'm really excited to see how that continues to grow.
And I would just add that we are seeing the same at college counseling centers across all of the campuses of the University of Minnesota. So the willingness to reach out and to use those resources that are there is definitely a change with this generation of college students.
Kaz, what changes have you seen?
Well, the culture's shifting slowly but surely. More and more, we're seeing applicants to residency programs willing to disclose their own personal history of mental illness in their personal statement, something that we just never, ever, ever used to see because people would worry that they would be discriminated against, rightfully so. And not to say that that discrimination still doesn't actively happen, but there's people willing to take a stand and push against that. And then also, we used to have a lot of trouble actually recruiting to the field of psychiatry compared to other disciplines like family medicine or dermatology. And now psychiatry is one of the top 5 specialties that the medical students are choosing coming out of their medical school training. And so small steps, but very important and real concrete changes that are contributing to solutions here.
All right. I don't see anyone ask a question on Slido, so I'm going to just go a little rogue here. And if there's anyone that has a question that they really want to ask, just yell it out at me and I will say it into the microphone. Raise your hand first, I guess, if there's anybody. Just want to make sure people had an opportunity. So I wanted to go over some basic, if you were sitting down with a first-year student, what advice would you give them for them to make the most of their college career without contributing to kind of that hitting a wall or having a mental health crisis? As much as they can control. Sometimes you can't. But.
Right. I think the first piece that we try to share would be the importance of balance. And choices. Choosing the things that matter to you. Certainly as a first-year student, it's kind of a smorgasbord, right? So trying a bunch of different things, but then deciding where you want to spend your time and where you want to spend your energy. And from the beginning, making good choices about sleep, about making connections and building community, about connecting to your faculty members so that they know you and you know them, which is something all of our faculty want at Morris and we're able to do. Also connecting with the staff members and the programs that are around you so that finding your place, getting connected in, and balance, I think, would be our top messages.
Nina?
This is not theoretical for me. One of my dear friends just went away for her first year. So I actually had this conversation. I had 3 points. One was very similar, that I really want you to take care of your overall well-being. So that means sleeping, eating, and that getting out into nature and getting movement is really important and will help with your well-being. My number 2 point was to get to class. It's very easy when those alarm bells are going off to not get there, but that academic stress can really be mitigated by getting to class, and which leads me to point number 3. I didn't go too much. It was just 3. Number 3 was to know your resources and to access your resources. I think I really appreciated how you shared about it's difficult sometimes to access resources. I hear a lot of folks talk about, is my problem bad enough in order to go? And to know that your faculty are there as resources for you, and the resources on campus are there for you, and to really access them. And even if you don't know where to start somewhere, and they can get you into the right place.
Yeah, you don't have to, you're not signing up for lifelong therapy necessarily. You can find something in between, something to fit you. Lesley?
I think the best advice that I've received on this topic was from a mentor of mine, and it was actually in my second year, but I wish I had heard it a year earlier, which is that you're a student second and you're a person first. And that's what it comes down to, because yes, I'm here and I'm paying a lot of money and I have a lot that I want to do and that I want to achieve, but that does not matter if I'm not taking care of myself as a human being primarily. And really thinking critically. This was somebody that I knew through a job, and they said this should probably be your third priority, all things considered. Number 1 should be taking care of yourself because you're a human being. Number 2 should be that you're a student, and number 3 should be your job here. And that's something that I try to repeat and emulate, in addition to the please access your resources when you feel that you could benefit from them. But I think that goes along with, it's important as a human being, as a person, that I'm accessing my resources, even though that's taking time away from my classes and from some of that academic work that I could be doing.
Kaz?
Well, I've been using the hashtag eat, sleep, pee, lactate to underscore the necessary essential pieces to being a person first. But you'd be amazed how many medical students go the whole day without using the bathroom, because of the pressure and the intensity. So if we can remember that as a refrain, it would be great for everyone. But I think also not to underestimate for first-year college students the role of the context change from one setting to another and the adjustment that goes along with it. Because you might feel as a senior in high school, hey, I've got this, I kind of know how to study, I sort of know how to get my needs met, but all of those things need to be relearned in a new context. And sometimes that can really take people by surprise, and they can feel a lot of shame. How come I didn't have problems before, how come I'm having problems now? That's a normal thing, and all those skills do need to be relearned when you're in a new setting.
All right, so we've got fill you up, look for things that fill you up and don't numb you up. Sleep. Say no. Get outside. Name your problem if you have a problem. Try to identify it. Believe that this is a real problem if someone tells you they have a problem, and believe it's a real problem if you have it. Make sure people know you, from faculty to staff to other friends and peers. Eat, get to class, know your resources. You're a student second, a person first, and be aware your life has changed and relearn the context of being in college. Sounds good. All right, thank you all. Let me tell everybody, this is Sandra Olson-Loy. She's Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Morris. Nina Hernandez Bython, Diversity Liaison Counselor at the University of Minnesota Student Counseling Services. Lesley Kent, fourth-year undergraduate student, University of Minnesota College of Biological Sciences. And Kaz Nelson, who's an associate professor and vice chair of education in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Minnesota Medical School. Thank you all so much. It was great.
Thank you.